Welcome back to Global Media Network, LLC. Passionate World Talk Radio is a wholly owned subsidiary of GMN LLC. Our motto is educate, enlighten, and entertain. And today on Lest We Forget, historical, with hosts Lisa Skinner, Betsy Wurzel, and Lillian Caldwell, we have a very special guest that's going to be talking about suicide. And I will let Lisa Skinner introduce her guest.
Hi, thanks, Lillian. Welcome to the latest episode of Lest We Forget Historical. We have a very special guest joining us today. This is Frank King. Meet Lillian Caldwell, the CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, and one of our other hosts, Betsy Sloan, who also does Lest We Forget with us. And let me take a few minutes to introduce our very special guest, Frank King. So Frank is an expert on suicide prevention. And one of the things that he talks about is if whether or not you as an individual are able to recognize the signs, symptoms, and thoughts of depression and suicide in another human being. So he will be sharing with us skills and understanding that are necessary to save a life. And this is why Frank does what he does, to save a life, at least one life every single day. Frank has quite an impressive resume. He wrote for Jay Leno for over 20 years. He actually started his career as a stand-up comedian, and he has taken his own personal life experiences with mental illness that runs in his family and suicide ideation to the road to raise awareness on this tragic topic. I really have not shared my personal experience with too many people, but my high school boyfriend of 3 years committed suicide. And so did another one of our really close friends. And Danny was overheard saying at Lenny's funeral, "I'll be joining you soon, buddy." And then, he stuck a shotgun in his mouth and actually did pull the trigger. And I know that you have, I know that you share that with your audience too, that you know what the end of your gun tastes like. And today, everybody, I don't have a clue why he did what he did or why Lenny did what he did, but it was a very tragic part of my life that I lived with that burden of guilt. And I still do, because I never understood why he would do something as dramatic and drastic as taking his own life. So today's topic, the three of us decided we really wanted to raise awareness about the rise in teen suicides, because they are at an all-time high. So we're going to let Frank speak to that. And I am very appreciative and feel very blessed that Frank has agreed to join us. As a personal favor to me, he is my TEDx coach. He's my keynote coach. I've been working with Frank for over a year now. I think the world of him, and I really appreciate his willingness to come on and talk about suicide on this show with us. He's a very sought out speaker, and I'm so proud to tell you, Frank holds the record to date for having given more TEDx talks than any other human being on the planet. Tell us how many TEDx talks you have done to date, Frank.
I'm doing number 11 on the 14th. I'm going to do number 12 on December 12th. So that'll be an even dozen by the end of the year.
That is just remarkable. So congratulations to you.
Congratulations. Yes.
Yeah, he's a world-renowned speaker, and he'll tell you his story in a minute once I decide to zip my mouth. But one of the reasons why he is so passionate about this topic is he discovered, and a lot of it has to do with his own personal family history and his own experience with suicide ideation, that one of the ways to deal with it is to inject humor into the subject. And that sounds like a huge contradiction, but he makes it work. So without any further ado, I want to pass the mic to Frank and let him tell you his story and answer our question: why are we seeing such a huge rise in teen suicide ideation? And not just ideation, but actually these kids following through with taking their own lives. I mean, there was a girl on the news last week, a teenager, who killed herself right in front of a police officer, I think. It's like, oh my gosh. And a lot of kids I know, I read, like, step in front of trains. And I mean, it's just really kind of gotten out of control. So can you help us understand what is happening out there?
Well, you're right. The teen suicide rate, teen and college suicide rate has gone up. During the pandemic, actually, the overall suicide rate went down a bit. The only demographics that went up were teens and college students. Maybe because 40% of high school students in the last study I read reported anxiety and co-occurring mental health conditions like depression, and 60% of college students self-reported anxiety and co-occurring mental health issues, which is an all-time high. And I believe a great deal of it has to do with social media. Social media is just a tool, can be used for good or can be used for evil. And unfortunately, it can be used for bullying. And we have a young lady who, in Eugene, Oregon, 13-year-old. She was bullied online, and I guess just one bullying incident too many, she took her life. The television station called me. I went in and we talked about suicide in general, teen suicide in specific. When we were kids, when I was a kid, I'm 66. So when I was a kid, when you left school, you left the bully behind. Nowadays, the kids take the bully home in their pocket in the form of a smartphone.
Oh, yeah.
And go ahead. Yeah, I don't know if I could have handled that. I mean, it's one thing if somebody comes.
You're cutting in and out. We can't really get a full sentence out of what you're saying.
Let me cut my camera off to give us some more bandwidth.
Okay.
I'm in downtown Vegas, so hopefully the signal is not the issue. Where's the camera? There I am. Oh, look at a handsome guy.
Yeah.
Yes. As I said, the kids nowadays take the bully home in their pocket, and I've seen some of the text that these kids.
Better.
Not
That's
text.
much better.
Yeah, I've seen some of the posts that these kids are, slinging at each other, and it's one thing if somebody came after me as an adult, as a troll, they came after me. I'll probably never meet any of these people, but imagine if the people that are coming after you are your high school classmates, and you have to not only put up with it, but see them day after day. I said to somebody, I would have just told my mother, I need to be homeschooled. I can't take this. I bet you there's a rise in homeschooling for that reason, because it's just, it's those keyboard warriors. They're just vicious. And by the way, when I did my TEDx on what's called digital media addiction, the reason people do troll is because if they can move up the food chain on the internet by trolling others and dragging others down, sadly. Now, the overall suicide rate up again in 2022. When I started speaking on suicide prevention in 2014, 39,000 people in the U.S. died by suicide every year. 39,000. That does not include opioid deaths, because you don't know oftentimes whether that was on purpose or just
last week's show, we actually
2022, latest numbers I saw,
last,
almost 50,000.
go ahead.
Oh, just 50,000 is what the last study I saw from 2022, almost 50,000, which is one every 8 or 9 minutes. The good news, Lisa, is that 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. 9 out of 10 give hints in the last week leading up to an attempt, which means most people want to be saved. Most people can be saved if you know how to start the conversation. And that's what we'll cover before we part company today. It's a matter of knowing what signs and symptoms to look for. As you said, your classmate, your boyfriend, I guess, and the classmate didn't give any sign or symptom that they were circling up on a suicide. It's possible that they did, but not knowing what it looked like or sounded like. That's why I keynote. I teach people how to spot the signs and symptoms, depression, and thoughts of suicide, what to say and do, what not to say, what not to do, and how to find resources. Because what I've discovered, Lisa, even though one person in the U.S. dies about every 8 or 9 minutes, and one person around the world dies every 40 seconds of suicide, hardly anybody talks about it unless you bring it up, and then almost everybody has a story. So my job is to come in and simply start that conversation. Get on stage, tell my story, be vulnerable. I believe vulnerability is a superpower. I got that from Brene Brown. Especially a man talking about his mental health issues. Men tend not to talk about it. And that's one of the reasons that 7 or 8 out of 10 suicides in the U.S. right now are men. It's as it was when I was a kid growing up in the southeastern United States. Big boys don't cry. We got to be tough. Can't show emotions. Can't reach out for help. And we're trying to change that. I co-authored 4 books on men's mental health in an effort to change that. We'll tell you, most of the books are bought by women. We figure because they've got a man in their life, father, brother, nephew, friend, who's struggling and they have no idea how to help. So hopefully they're getting help by way of those books. Again, you can make a difference. You can save a life, and you can do it by doing something as simple as we're doing right here, and that is starting that conversation. That's the good news, because suicide is one of the most preventable causes of death on the planet. If you know what you're looking at and listen for. And I'm still here, Lisa. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we're having trouble hearing everything you're saying. You're cutting out every couple seconds.
Not sure why. I mean, if I was up in a mountain somewhere of Oregon, I would imagine it would be iffy. But I think in downtown Las Vegas,
yeah,
it was. Yeah,
it's the mafia.
So, yeah, that's right. And I'm in Vegas. I'm here for a joint venture convention, looking for people that might want to take speaker coaching classes. This coming week, October 10th, is International Mental Health Awareness Day, and I'm doing a fundraiser in New York City on the 10th with a bunch of entertainers to raise money and awareness for mental health and mental health issues.
Well, using my personal experience as an example, I would have thought that a friend overhearing him say at Lenny's funeral, "I'll be joining you soon, buddy," would have been a telltale sign that he was contemplating something very similar, and it just went ignored, because shortly after that, I'd say within the next couple months, he followed through with that. So possibly, hypothetically, if maybe somebody had taken that comment seriously and did an intervention or called somebody, I mean, what could somebody do in that same situation that overheard that comment? What would you recommend somebody do to bring it to somebody's attention, whether they thought he was serious or not? But it's a very bizarre thing for somebody to say at a funeral. And obviously he meant what he said, because it was within a few months after that he took his life. So what resources are out there if anybody ever found themselves in a similar situation and overheard a comment like that.
Well, the protocol, Lisa,
Yeah.
is you ask them flat out, are you having thoughts of suicide? Just like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they say yes, then you say, do you have a plan? If they have a plan, what is your plan? And if it's detailed time, place, and method, you need to get them to a mental health facility for evaluation, just evaluation, or get them on the phone with 988, the suicide prevention life and text line.
And will if somebody calls that number, will they send somebody out and actually do an intervention and take them to the hospital on a suicide watch?
Probably not somebody from 988, but if you're concerned about somebody being an immediate threat to themselves or others, then you dial 911. And if the police come and they find the person is actively suicidal, they will take them in front of a judge, and the judge will determine if they need a 3-day lockdown. So
And
that's
they'll observe them for those 3 days. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll lock down for 3 days. Now they're going to be mad at you for doing that, but they'll be alive to unfriend you from Facebook.
Yeah.
Uh,
I could live with that. I could definitely.
yeah. Now, let's say they are suicidal. They have a plan, but it's not detailed. What would you just say? I would say, well, are you going to kill yourself? If they said no, I would say, okay, tell me why not. Make them give voice to what's keeping them here, because something is keeping them here. That's the protocol. Now, there are signs of depression you can look for, if you guys can hear me. Eat too much, can't eat. Sleep too much, can't sleep. Trouble getting out of bed in the morning, late for work or school, and letting their personal hygiene go. Big, big red flags.
Okay.
What don't you say? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's not what you're supposed to say.
I'm sorry, what don't you say?
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah. That's kind of like rubbing salt into the wound, right?
What you do say is, I'm here for you. I know that depression is a mental illness. Time and treatment, things will get better. I will take the time. I'll help you get the treatment.
So what can we do, if anything, about the rise in teenage and college age suicide ideations and ones who actually follow through with these ideations? What do you recommend as a society we can do to help save these lives, as you would put it, to help save these lives, these precious lives, and they have their whole lives to look forward to, and they don't, for some reason, don't believe that life is worth living at 15 or 16 years old, which I find absolutely tragic, because they don't know what they have to look forward to, which obviously they think is nothing. So what can we do to help save these lives and help get them over this hump and get them through to adulthood and later years, and hopefully have them look back and realize that, wow, I had a lot to look forward to, and I sure am glad I didn't go through with my suicide plans. What's been your experience with trying to help save these people that really believe that life is not worth living at whatever age they're at?
Well, from a societal / education level, I believe that health education class, starting in middle school, age appropriately, they should be teaching health class and mental health class so that all the students can keep an eye on each other. They'll know what to look for and listen for.
Are they currently doing that based on your knowledge and experience?
Not to my knowledge. It's one of those things that people don't want to talk about. Parents, understandably, don't want to think their child is anything but perfect.
No,
So
you're right.
let's say you're listening and you have a child, a teen child, college age child. My advice always is don't say to them, but you have so much to live for, because trust me, as somebody who lives with suicidality, that's not going to mean much.
No.
What you do say is you need to join the conversation in their head and say to them, I bet it occurs to you on occasion that you are a burden and we would be better off without you. In no uncertain terms, are you a burden? In no uncertain terms, would we be better off without you? That's what I think you need to say. And that's the conversation they're having with themselves. If
That
they've,
reminds me of very similar conversations that I teach people to have who are living with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. It's a very similar approach. And, it really is all in the way you present the information and not, like exacerbate the situation just by delivering the message the wrong way. It sounds very, very similar to me.
yes, and people mean well when they get it wrong. They care, otherwise they wouldn't say anything. But again, as someone who lives with suicidality and depression, I have the advantage, Lisa, of having gone through my depression cycle thousands of times. It lasts about 3 days. I know that. The young people need to know that depression is only a visitor. But when you're young and you have not been through the cycle, a lot of times, people with depression tend to think in the immediate moment, and they're thinking, if it doesn't get any better than this, and I don't think it will, why bother? I know, because I've been through it so many times, that when it starts, 3 days later, I'll be back to a relative normal. But they
What
don't
do
have that
you do when
advantage.
you're in one of those 3-day depression cycles and you
Well,
recognize it?
the first thing I do is not fight it anymore. I used to say I fight depression. That's a misnomer. I can't fight it. I can't win. I can tie, stay alive. So I try to blend with the energy and just ride the wave and allow it to help move me forward, one foot in front of the other until it dissipates, like a wave breaking, rather than fight the wave. Rather than going at it head on, I turn and go with the energy.
I do know that one of the things that you share with the audience during your TEDx talks, and you say it very openly, very honestly, very genuinely, and it's part of your TED talk, that you know what the end of your gun tastes like. And that's
That
how
is true.
you have come to ending your life. Can you share with us what gave you the strength to not pull that trigger and to stop yourself at the moment that you really believe that was your only answer? Because that takes a lot of strength and a lot of courage to pull the gun back out of your mouth when it's that close and convince yourself that, what am I thinking? I don't want to take my life. How did you overcome that?
Well, it's no, it's I think it's is it Home Two Suites? Hang on one second. The is that 3565 Craig? I think I'm in the Hilton Garden Inn. It's not the Hilton Garden Inn. It's it's home. Where's the Hilton Garden Inn? This is Home Two Suites. Hang on one second, Lisa. Just hang on one second. I need to go. Yes, by Hilton, but is it the right Hilton? Hang on. This is why we have digital editing. Hang on. I don't know. Let me look. Home to suites. It is correct, sir. You are correct, sir. All right, at least I'm in the right place. I'm gonna step inside, and I bet I get a better signal when I'm sitting still. Hang on. Yes, correct, sir. Yes. It's Home to Suites by Hilton. I love the Hilton properties, Lisa. Uh, uh, and I will tell you my story and how my life insurance
Bear
actually
with us
saved my
for
life.
just a moment, everybody. Frank is a very, very in-demand man and
Yeah.
always on the road. And he was gracious enough to work us into his travel schedule to be here today. So we are just so appreciative of him coming on today and sharing all of this valuable information. So we're just going to go with the flow here, and he'll be back in just a second when he parks himself in the lobby and rejoins us.
Lisa?
We're here. We're here. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So, did you catch my last question?
Yes. About putting a gun in my mouth and why I didn't pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Well, and a friend of mine came up after a keynote recently and said to me, "Hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger?" I said, "Hey, man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed?" That's where the humor is in my topic area. Not jokes, but funny personal anecdotes like that. So what it was, Lisa, was we filed bankruptcy in the last recession, lost everything. It was destroying my wife. I had $1 million life insurance policy. I thought, I can fix this. I am a burden. I am more dead than alive. I can end my life and restore my wife financially. But I knew, having sold insurance, there's a 2-year suicide clause. So I called my agent. I said, "How long do I have the policy?" He said, 22 months, and don't do it, because he knew why I was calling. Knew I was having financial problems, knew I was asking really for permission to kill myself. So I had to wait 2 months to kill myself, because I was not going to leave my wife brokenhearted and broke. So fortunately, after 2 months, I don't recall, I wasn't marking days off the calendar. Things must have gotten a little better. And I didn't, think about it again that seriously. That was April of 2010. So that's why I didn't pull the trigger. I couldn't leave my wife brokenhearted and broke.
Yeah. So you were actually, which is kind of unusual for somebody who's about to take their own life, you were concerned about somebody else. And usually that thought, from my understanding, people who are going to take their life aren't really concerned with how it's going to impact the living. They're only worried about taking care of their own pain.
Yes, but burdensomeness is one of the symptoms of suicidality. So from the outside looking in, it's very selfish. Didn't you think about what this is going to have, how this is going to impact other people? But oddly, I thought I was a burden. It was a selfless act on my part to kill myself because my wife would get $1 million. And like I said about young people, if their parents have been dealing with this with them for a number of years, and it seems to be putting stress and strain on the family, the young person may think, I shouldn't put my folks through this. I'm a burden. And so it's on the inside looking out, it's selfless, irrational, but selfless. On the outside looking in, very selfish. But most people are thinking about the people they're leaving behind.
One of the other things that you share in your TED Talks, and you have shared with me personally, is suicide ideation actually runs in your family. And you've had a grandmother and an aunt take their own lives. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were one of the ones that discovered one of them, either your aunt or your grandmother. And you want to tell us a little bit about that story and how that impacted you as a younger person to discover that horrible scene?
Yes, my grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her 9 years later, because my mother could not reach my grandmother on the phone, and got worried and went over and found that my grandmother had had taken her life. She'd done pretty much everything that needed to be done before that. She'd written the checks and stamped and addressed the envelopes for the bills, put them on the kitchen counter. She pinned her will to her house coats so my mother could find it. And she sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a note, turned on the gas in the old gas stove, blew out the pilot light, closed all the windows and doors. 9 years later, my great aunt, my grandmother's sister, was winding down mentally. My mother couldn't reach her, so she got panicked. I was 4 years old. She bundled me into the car, went over to my great aunt's house. And nothing was out of place until we got to the kitchen. And I'll leave the story right there because what follows is horror movie horrible, especially for a 4-year-old.
Oh, I
And
can't.
yeah, it's in my first TEDx talk, A Matter of Laugh or Death. And the thing about if you're already hardwired for depression and suicide and you're that close to an actual suicide, well, the chance of you seriously considering taking your life later in life go up. And that's what happened in April 2010 because I was hardwired for it because I've been that close to a suicide. You know, I saw the way out for me and for my wife, restore her financially. Then, yeah, so that's the danger if you are already hardwired and you are that close to an actual suicide. And at 4 years old, after finding my great aunt, yeah, I screamed for days, apparently. So it was gruesome. I'll spare your audience the gory details, but it's in my first TEDx talk, A Matter of Laugh, Laugh, or Death on YouTube.
Now, just like me, and I never saw the scene, I just heard about it with my personal experience, and it has stayed with me all these years. I don't think I'll ever, completely have any closure from it. So, is that similar to your experience discovering your great aunt?
Similar in a way. In your case, Lisa, you were a budding adult in high school. Probably have some survivor's guilt.
I do.
Not uncommon. Why didn't I notice something? What if I've been nicer to the person? Oftentimes, it's a matter of, well, I told them I'd come by, and I got tied up, and I said, we'll just do it next week. So when they take their life, you feel guilty because maybe if you'd gone over, they might not have ended their lives. So the therapy there, by the way, has a name. It's called suicide postvention. Because let's say somebody at a business, a long-term employee passes away by suicide. Everybody at the business oftentimes has those issues, unanswered questions, don't understand. Somebody needs to come in and do a postvention and do their best to decode and answer all those questions. A lot of companies just sweep it under the carpet. The guy's there one day, gone the next. Let's not talk about it. But there are a lot of unanswered questions and survivor's guilt as well.
Well, the other thing that I suffered from as a result of that entire experience was self-blame. And I don't know this for sure, but he wanted to get married and I didn't. I was looking forward to a completely different life than he had in mind for us. And somebody kind of alluded to me that's why he did it, was because he couldn't imagine a life without me. It's like, oh, gee, thanks, just what I need to hear. And I live with that for all these years that I was responsible for this person taking his life. And that's a hard burden to bear. It really is.
Yes, and it's oftentimes oftentimes young, will say to a boyfriend or girlfriend or non-binary friend who has broken up with them, if you don't get back together with me, I'll kill myself, which, by the way, A, should be taken seriously. B, it tends to be your emotional blackmail. So if there's somebody listening, they're young or old, and somebody says, if you don't get back together with me, I'm going to kill myself, then the next question should be, well, do you have a plan? And my guess is, if it's
most
emotional
people really don't mean it, but
yeah, but you got to take it seriously.
Those who do.
Yeah, and you got to take it seriously. And if you say to them, "Do you have a plan?" and they stammer, because if they're serious about suicide, they've got a plan. If they're just trying to get back together with you, they probably don't have a plan.
Yeah. Lillian or Betsy, do you have any questions for Frank before he has to say goodbye to us?
I have one question. They have these psychiatrists now that are online, and they tell you, well, if you feel bad or you feel like you're going to kill yourself, that you should just call up and start talking to them. Are they effective that way?
Can be. Oftentimes, another human voice. I would default to calling the 988, the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, because they're
Or
trained
go to a
specifically in suicide.
hospital, I would think.
Or check yourself into a hospital. Say, look,
Yeah.
I'm going to hurt myself. The problem for psychiatrists and psychologists oftentimes is the ones I've met don't get a lot of training in suicide prevention. I don't know how many days they spend in that, on that curriculum in college, but it doesn't seem. I mean, when I speak, oftentimes the clinician will come up and I'll be saying things they have not heard. Like I have a condition called chronic suicidal ideation, meaning for me, suicide is always an option on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. My car broke down. I had three thoughts: get it fixed by noon or kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
I have had long-term clinicians, when I said that out loud, stare at me like a pig staring at a wristwatch. They have no idea what I'm talking about. So I would default to 988, and I wouldn't wait till I was standing on the ledge to call 988. They'd much rather have you call, earlier upstream in the process so they can prevent you from getting all the way downstream and on the verge of suicide.
If you have, I mean, my grandmother and my mother both committed suicide. One of them made it through a colonoscopy operation when she was 86, and so she willed herself to die in 24 hours. And my mom had 3 forms of cancer, and she just starved herself to death. Is that like something that runs through your genes, or is it not?
It sounds situational to me in those cases. I'm no clinician or diagnostician.
I'm just curious, not that I'm going to kill myself and make it easy on other people, but
well, it's also the name. You often find it in children. It's called passive suicidality. So your relatives wouldn't actively try to end their life with pills or a weapon, but they've come to the point where they're thinking, if I didn't wake up tomorrow morning, that would be fine. So they're not actively, as I said, with like pills or a gun, going to end their life. But they're at a point, children, you often hear say this if they've suffered great trauma. I used to pray every night that I wouldn't wake up in the morning. I would never have killed myself, but if I didn't wake up in the morning, I wouldn't, that wouldn't be bad because they're in some kind of, awful situation at home.
Okay, well, those things never occur to me. I just warned my son I intend to be taken out kicking and screaming. So get used to it.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not going out feet first. What I would say is, and because of the work that Lisa does, and I assume you do, is that with caregiving of any kind, I've had 2 aortic valve replacements and a double bypass and a heart attack. And all that was much harder on my wife and my caregiver than it was on me because there's a whole team of people working on me, very concerned about my welfare. Whereas for the caregiver, oftentimes we overlook how stressful that can be. We need to make sure who cares for the caregivers is the question I ask in the keynote if I'm speaking to a convention where it's like owners of assisted living, graduated care, that kind of facility. Who cares for the caregivers? The rest of the family who is, because you, as Lisa would tell you, live through this Alzheimer's, this long goodbye together.
Yeah. And so, Frank, I don't think you're aware of this, but both Lillian and Betsy were the primary caregivers to their husbands who both suffered for many, many years with Alzheimer's disease. Betsy's husband had early onset and they took care of their husbands for years. So yeah, I think this is hitting pretty close to home for them personally, because they've also been there and done that. So
yeah.
And what I was
tough.
Go ahead. Well, I tell people, and I got this from my wife, if you know somebody who is in that situation, they often could use a break. And so rather than saying to them, listen, if you ever need anything, give me a call, my wife suggests, I think wisely, give them a list of things. Would you like a break? Can I just sit in and let you have a few hours off? Would it be helpful if I did a drugstore, grocery store run for you? I mean, come by and walk the dog to, to lift the burden. It's not just anything I can do for you, let me know, but make suggestions. Cook a meal or two. How about if I cooked a couple of meals? Or we all got together and cooked you guys a week's worth of meals. Would that be helpful? So be proactive in your offer to help is what I believe.
Well, and this is one of the biggest rubs that we all hear and have experienced. I know Betsy has and Lillian has, and I've heard this a zillion times from families I've worked with, that as soon as you get that Alzheimer's diagnosis and you are appointed or elected to be the primary caregiver, everybody else in your world, in your tribe, disappears off the face of the earth, and they do not get any offers of help. I guess you ladies can certainly relate.
Oh yeah, the dust hung in the air.
Yeah.
Yes,
because it scared them. It scared the living crap out of them.
And I'm going back 30 years of experience at counseling families in this situation, and I have unfortunately and very sadly heard this story too many times from the primary caregivers that feel like they were just kind of left holding the bag.
I think it's worse than that, Lisa. And you and I talked about this because my wife, father came down with cancer, not dementia, but cancer. So even though he'd been awful to her as a child, she felt like she needed to go home and help him up until the end for her own peace of mind. And she did everything she could. And I believe this is very common. She has a brother, and they were cousins, and none agreed to come over and spell her. But you know what they were willing to do? Tell her how she was doing everything wrong.
Yeah, criticize. Absolutely, 100%. They could do it so much better. I've heard that.
Why?
Well, come on and do it then. Right?
Exactly. You know who helped her out? Hospice.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for hospice, she would have lost her mind.
Yeah. I believe that, because hospice sounds
These are all two common scenarios from, family members, and I think where you're going with this, Frank, is to raise awareness of the suicide ideations that caregivers have very frequently, especially caring for somebody with cognitive decline, because it's such a hard job. You just, there's the communication disconnect, and you never know what to expect. You never can anticipate what's coming at you. And it's probably, and I say this in my talks too, it's probably the hardest job anybody will ever have to take on, is to care for somebody who lives with cognitive loss. Especially when they can't their wants and their needs like they did when their brains were healthy. So it's a constant, guessing game, and it's very demanding, and you never know what is going to happen from minute to minute. So I think that's probably where you were going with bringing this caregiver topic up, right?
Yes, because, in many cases, they are on call 24 hours a day. There is, there are people who have, I assume, dementia, one form or another, who, light up in the middle of the night. Physician cousin of mine called them sundowners. As soon as the sun went down, they were up. He said he would give them a couple of Benadryl. That helped to, get them back in bed. But yeah, it's 24/7, 365. There is no break. And the human body can only stand, and mind can only stand so much. So you gotta figure that they they must be thinking every now and then. I got a neighbor across the street. His girlfriend is quadriplegic, and he's been caring for her ever since she had her accident. And
you're actually going to be a featured speaker at my summit at the end of January, and we're going to talk on this very subject for caregivers, because it is such a chronic issue out there in the world, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse with the number of people who on a daily basis are developing Alzheimer's.
Yes. And
I have something to say.
yeah. Yes. Fire away.
Yes. Frank, thank you so much. I really can relate to you. And I'm a huge mental health advocate. On my show, Chatting with Betsy, talking about mental health issues a lot. What you said is what I have said. I think we need to raise our boys, our sons, to be able to express emotion, that they don't have to be strong, that they don't have to suck it up. It's okay to cry about a loss, to say that you need help. I'm almost the same age as you, and even as a woman, growing up, as a child back in the 60s, it was a sign of weakness to cry.
Yeah.
And I thought about suicide when I was 8 or 9. I didn't feel loved at home. Thankfully, I didn't do it. And fast forward, as a caregiver, I was thinking about how the railroad tracks felt in the winter versus the summer, and it scared the crap out of me. It scared me because I hadn't thought about suicide since I was a child. And I would never leave my family. I never would have left my family. And I said, Betsy, you've got to get out of this rabbit hole and never go back in. And I'm always recommending therapy and counseling, because we need to address these mental health issues. Too many caregivers do commit suicide. There was a man in a group who did. He was caring for his wife for years, and his house flooded and he killed himself. And the young people, committing suicide, it's really, and I'm glad I came out of my hole. Never to go back in again. But I also want to say, when children tell their parents, I'm depressed, I'm sad, back then we didn't discuss mental health issues. Please don't tell them to snap out of it. Please address that issue and take it. Or say, you're better off than other people. Look at people in other countries. Because to that child, they do have a problem. They are sad, and they need help trying to figure that out. Don't shut off that communication, folks, to your children. And thank you for what you do, Frank.
Sure. Yeah, I met a Hispanic woman at a college, and her mother had come with her father from Mexico. They had nothing in their pockets, and they established a business. And so she was raised in a home where they weren't wealthy, but she didn't want for anything. And there are groups their cultural groups that tend not to come out to friends and family, African Americans, Native Americans, Alaskan Americans, Hispanics. They don't come out as often and express the issues they're having. She decided to tell her mother that she was depressed, and her mother said, "What do you have to be depressed about? At this time in my life, I was living in a hut with a dirt floor. You have everything." Which I understand, where a mother's coming from, but that's not what the young person needs to hear. I think you said it. They need to really listen to what the young person is saying. Make it comfortable for them to come out and express it. Because what breaks my heart is somebody who's lost a child to suicide, and the child many times says nothing. And then there are other couples where the child said something, they were able to short circuit the suicide. The child is still alive. And I say, you count your blessings that your child felt comfortable enough to come to you with that issue, because many times they don't, and they're gone. So,
and the other thing too, I have realized just from being around as long as I've been around, and kind of experiencing life and the world, is when you're in the eye of that storm, you certainly are not thinking about how much better you have things than other people. If you were rational like that and thinking along those lines, you probably wouldn't be on the brink of taking your own. So to rub that in somebody's face, I would think would probably just exacerbate the situation and make them feel even more inclined to go through with their ideation, because they don't believe that at that moment that anybody has it worse than they do, because you don't think rationally and logically at that time. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yes, and think about this. She was brave to come out to her mother, anticipating that it might not go well, but she was brave enough to come out. Dude, I would imagine she'll never mention it again, even if she's rolling up on a suicide. Because, and I can't fault her mother, different generation. She did come up the hard way, different culture. They don't often understand or believe in, sometimes don't believe in mental illness. I have a friend from South Asia. Her folks from Pakistan. I helped her get a TEDx talk. She mentioned 3 suicide attempts in the TEDx and the fact she lives with schizoaffective disorder. Her mother was furious and said, and I quote, "In our community, we don't talk about that," end quote. And my friend said, that is exactly why I did the TEDx, because I cannot be the only one.
Yeah.
I think
Somebody's
all I was
got to
going to
be.
mention.
Go ahead.
No, I'm quiet.
Somebody has to be unafraid to lead the freak parade. That's my job. I get up on stage and let my freak flag fly, and I rally my troops, because people come up afterwards. I always allow an extra half an hour, 45 minutes for individuals.
I was just going to say that our generation was brought up on the strong silent types, John Wayne and all that ilk. And you were taught I'm a 50s kid, and I know I was brought up with World War II and what happened overseas and everything. And you just didn't stand a chance to say, there's something wrong with me mentally. I'm not all together. And I remember my brother always saying, I wouldn't go to a psychologist because it would show up on my resume and I won't be able to get a job. So for years, he got away with some really nasty things to me that my parents never addressed, because they did not want to make it more difficult for him to get the job he wanted to get. And somehow
I can totally relate to what you're saying, Lillian. What you just said.
I got punished, and he did all kinds of things. They never did a thing, ever. Everybody else wanted to shrink except him.
Well,
that's all I wanted to say.
The younger generation, fortunately, in general, is more likely to come out to their parents or peers. And my family especially, because my mother's generation didn't talk about it.
No, you didn't. They didn't want to hear. They didn't want to know.
My generation, my sister, my cousins, and my sister's children, and my cousin's children, it's all, they have no problem coming out and go, look, I'm depressed. I think I need a little therapy.
Different culture and a different society. When the gays came out of the closet, they brought out a lot more with them than just the fact that they had a different attitude about themselves as to who they were. And that's a good thing. Otherwise, we'd still be suppressed.
Yes, and still a difficult road to hoe.
Yes. Absolutely.
Nowadays, depending on where you are, especially in the country, can be more difficult than other places. But yes.
Midwest, the West, down south, where they still have those images. Macho men.
Well, a woman in California was shot because she flew the rainbow flag outside her business, I do believe.
Yes.
So yeah, it has gotten better, but we still have a long way to go.
I have something else to say. Back when I was 16, so you're talking about 1974, I bucked the system in my family. I was the black sheep, and I need help. So I went to see a social worker. And back then, it was a shame. I was shamed for going for help. I was called names in my family. I was gaslighted. They made fun of me. And this is really ironic. My sister, who called me all kinds of names, later went for therapy. So I tell people, don't throw stones, do not judge people, because you don't know what curveball life has for you, and you might need help. Everybody needs help at some point in their life, and it's okay.
Yes. Yeah, but coming out needing help mentally in his mid-70s, that's definitely an act of bravery. Oh, sorry.
Okay. I hate to break this, but we've been on for an hour and we need to wrap it up. We will bring Frank back maybe after the first of the year. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Or maybe right before right between
Or right before
Thanksgiving
the
and
holidays, which is the most depressing time of the year, period.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
care who you are.
Yeah, maybe between Thanksgiving and Christmas, right in that spot.
That would be awesome. Okay. Let's make a date, kid. I mean,
Frank,
Lisa.
before we go, is there any advice you want to give a shout out about to our listeners? So, maybe it would help save another life real quickly. What advice do you like to leave people with? Or
Well, again, the good news is 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal or ambivalent can't make up their mind. 9 out of 10 give hints, which means most people want to be safe. Do it as simply as what we're doing right here, and that is starting the conversation if you know how. And now you guys have some mental health tools in your mental health toolkit about what to look for and what to say. So that'd be the slice of good news.
Great.
Thanks again so much for being willing to come on and share all this wonderful information and your personal experiences with us. I know that's not an easy thing to do, but we appreciate you very much. I appreciate you very much. And we will definitely look forward to having you on again right before the holidays, and maybe together we can save some lives.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Frank,
Well, what? Say again?
Where people can connect with you?
Yes, mentalhealthcomedian.com. Mentalhealthcomedian.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
I want to thank
Betsy and Lillian, what you don't know is I'm here because a part of a plea bargain. They said jail or spend some time on a podcast with Lisa. And I said, okay, I'll do the podcast.
I don't know. Spending time in jail sounds pretty, Anyway, I want to thank all the listeners today for joining us with our special guest, Frank King, at the suggestion of Lisa Skinner. And you can listen to this all over again on youtube.com/PWR network _PW Talk Radio, facebook.com/Passional World Radio, at https:// and you can reach Lisa Skinner at.
You talking to me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm the one with the bad connection. So
all right. And you can reach Lisa Skinner at drumroll
at dementiawhisperer1@gmail.com.
That's you Sloan at
the Dementia Whisperer.
SLOANBETSY31@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.
Thanks,
PWR Network LLC@gmail.com. And your call to action is if you know somebody who's having a mental health problem, you call 988 and get it solved. Because the next time you may not have the chance. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, you'll be guilty because we've all been taught how to carry guilt by our parents for the rest of our lives.
That's true.
Okay, thank you very much for
listening. All right, guys.
Bye-bye. And remember,
my pleasure.
Keep listening.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Frank.